Reality TV producers. What's the absolute worst thing you've seen on set? I just graduated film school and was so excited to finally be working in television. The head producer was a woman named Diane who had a reputation for making hit shows. She sat me down on my first day and explained how things worked. Our job is to give America a show worth watching. Sometimes that means pushing people a little bit. You understand? I nodded because I wanted to impress her. We had 20 women competing for one guy who was good-looking but pretty boring. Diane said our job was to make it interesting. Last year we had 2 contestants fight and one girl ripped off another one's eyebrow, she said. I want to top that. The first week of filming I noticed the contestants were always drinking. There was alcohol everywhere and the producers kept refilling their glasses even when the women said they'd had enough. I asked Diane about it and she laughed. Drunk people make better television. It's reality TV 101. By week 2, I was assigned to work closely with one of the contestants named Kira, who was sweet and a little shy. Diane told me to become her friend and get her to open up. Find out her weaknesses. What makes her cry. What she's insecure about. I need to know everything. I spent hours talking to Kira and she told me about her anxiety and how she'd had panic attacks in the past. She said she was on medication, but they'd taken it away when she got to set. I reported this back to Diane like I was supposed to. We've got to go bigger, Diane said. The next day, Diane set up a challenge where all the women had to do public speaking in front of a huge audience. Kira started hyperventilating on stage and collapsed. Diane kept the cameras rolling the entire time. When I tried to go help her, Diane grabbed my arm. Let her finish the breakdown. This is gold. Week 3 got worse. Another contestant came to me crying and said she needed to go home because the environment was destroying her mental health. I brought her to Diane thinking she'd understand. Instead, Diane sat her down and pulled out her contract. You see this? If you leave, you're in breach. We'll sue you for every penny you have and every penny you'll ever make. Is that what you want? She stayed and I watched her deteriorate every single day after that. Week 4, Diane called me into her office. I need you to tell Kira that one of the other girls called her pathetic behind her back. Say she told everyone Kira is faking her anxiety for camera time. I asked if that was true and Diane smiled. Does it matter? We need drama. Make it believable. I did what she said and hated myself for it. Kira and the other contestant got into a screaming fight that turned physical, pulling hair and clawing at each other. We filmed the entire thing. Diane was thrilled. This is exactly the kind of content that gets us renewed. But I want more. By week 5, the contestants looked like completely different people. They were barely sleeping because we'd wake them up at 3 in the morning for surprise dates and challenges. Kira had lost so much weight her clothes were hanging off her. She had dark circles under her eyes and wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to slip her some food during a break and Diane caught me. If you undermine my production one more time, you're fired, and I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. Week 6 was finale week. I got to set Monday morning and Kira hadn't shown up for her call time. I knocked on her room door and there was no answer. I knocked again and called her name. Nothing. I had a spare key for emergencies, so I opened the door. Kira was lying on the bathroom floor surrounded by empty pill bottles. I screamed and ran to her, but when I touched her skin, it was cold. I called for help and within minutes there were medics and producers everywhere. They tried to revive her, but she was already gone. I was sobbing hysterically while they took her body away. After the ambulance left, I went looking for Diane. She was in her office on the phone with someone from the network. I could hear her saying, "We can spin this." Tragic ending to the season. The ratings will be incredible. When she hung up, I told her we needed to shut down production immediately and tell people what had really been happening on this set. She looked at me coldly. Sit down. I sat and she pulled up my contract on her computer. You signed an NDA on your first day. You also signed a non-compete. If you say one word publicly about what happened here, we will sue you for millions of dollars. You'll lose everything and you'll never work in entertainment again. Do you understand? I asked what about Kira and what about telling the truth. Diane leaned back in her chair. Kira signed a contract too. She knew what she was signing up for. This is reality television. Sometimes people can't handle it. I sat there realizing I was completely trapped, and there was nothing I could do to make this right. My hands wouldn't stop shaking even when I pressed them against my legs under the desk. Diane kept talking about breach of contract and financial ruin, but the words kept sliding around in my head without making complete sense. I could hear my own breathing getting faster and shallower while she clicked through pages of legal documents on her screen. She pointed at specific paragraphs about damages and penalties, and said something about making an example out of people who broke their agreements. I nodded because that seemed like what she wanted, but I couldn't actually process what I was agreeing to. When she finally dismissed me, I stood up too fast and had to grab the edge of her desk to keep my balance. She didn't seem to notice or care. I walked out of her office and down the hallway past other producers who were on their phones or reviewing footage like it was just another normal day. The bathroom was 3 doors down and I barely made it inside before I threw up in the first stall. I stayed there on my knees with my forehead pressed against the cool metal divider, while my stomach kept heaving even after there was nothing left. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kira lying on that bathroom floor with the empty pill bottles scattered around her and her skin that awful gray color. I kept seeing my own hand reaching out to touch her arm and feeling how cold she was. The image wouldn't stop replaying no matter how hard I tried to think about something else. I threw up again and my throat burned. Someone came into the bathroom and I heard heels clicking on the tile floor, but they left without saying anything. I finally got up and rinsed my mouth at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale and my eyes were red and I looked like someone who had just found a dead body, which I guess I was. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to pull myself together because I still had to get through the rest of the day. Diane called an emergency meeting at 3 o'clock and all the production staff crammed into the main conference room. There were maybe 20 of us, including camera operators and sound technicians and assistant producers. Diane stood at the front of the room with her arms crossed and waited until everyone got quiet. Her voice was calm and steady when she started talking. She said we'd experienced a tragedy and she knew everyone was processing difficult emotions. She said Kira had struggled with mental health issues for years before coming on the show, and despite the support and resources the production provided, she had unfortunately succumbed to her illness. I sat in my chair listening to her rewrite what had actually happened. She said the show had mental health professionals available at all times and encouraged contestants to use those resources whenever they needed support. She said Kira had access to her medication and chose not to take it, which was her personal decision. Every single thing she said was a lie, and everyone in that room knew it, but nobody spoke up. She talked about how we'd all signed contracts and how important it was that we honored those agreements during this difficult time. She said the network would be releasing a statement and we should direct any media inquiries to the publicity department. She reminded us that we had NDAs, and those remained in effect regardless of circumstances. Then she asked if anyone had questions and the room stayed completely silent. She thanked us for our professionalism and dismissed the meeting. The next morning, 2 people from the network showed up in expensive suits and set up in the conference room again. They introduced themselves as crisis management consultants and said they were there to help us navigate the situation. The woman had perfectly styled blonde hair and kept her hands folded on the table while she talked. She said if anyone from the media or Kira's family or friends contacted us, we should decline to comment and refer them to the network publicity office. The man pulled up a presentation on the screen with bullet points about appropriate responses. They made us practice saying things like we were deeply saddened by the loss, and our thoughts were with Kira's family during this difficult time. They coached us on tone and body language and told us to avoid appearing defensive or guilty. The woman said we should emphasize that Kira signed comprehensive contracts and releases and received full disclosure about the show's format and requirements. They made us repeat these phrases over and over until they sounded natural. The man said if anyone asked specific questions about conditions on set or Kira's mental state, we should say we weren't authorized to discuss details of ongoing matters. They handed out printed cards with approved talking points and told us to keep them somewhere accessible. The whole session lasted 3 hours, and by the end I could recite their script perfectly, even though every word made me feel sick. I went back to my apartment that night and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every time I started to drift off, I'd see Kira's face and jerk awake with my heart pounding. I kept replaying moments from the past 6 weeks and thinking about all the times I could have done something different. I could have refused to manipulate her, or warned her what Diane was planning, or helped her get her medication back. I could have stood up to Diane when she made me lie about the other contestants, or when she kept the cameras rolling during Kira's panic attack. I could have quit after the first week when I saw how they were treating everyone. I played out alternate versions of events where I made better choices, and maybe Kira was still alive. But then I'd remember the contracts and the threats and how trapped everyone was, and I didn't know if different choices would have actually changed anything. The sun came up and I still hadn't slept. I got in the shower and stood under the hot water until it ran cold, but I still felt dirty. I got to the production office around 9 and found out from one of the other assistants that the network had decided to move forward with airing the season. She said they were planning to dedicate the finale episode to Kira's memory, with a special tribute segment. I asked if they were seriously going to air footage of her breaking down and deteriorating over 6 weeks, and she shrugged and said the network thought it would honor her legacy. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. They were going to use her suffering and death as a marketing tool and call it a tribute. I wanted to scream or break something or tell someone in authority what had really happened, but Diane's words kept echoing in my head about lawsuits and career destruction. I was too scared to speak up, so I went to my desk and opened my laptop and pretended to work on editing notes. 3 days later, Kira's family released a statement through their lawyer asking for privacy during their time of grief. The statement was short and formal and didn't say anything about the show or what had happened. I wondered if they knew the truth about how we'd treated her, or if the production company had fed them the same lies Diane told everyone else. I found out later that same day that the network had sent Kira's parents a settlement payment. One of the other producers mentioned it casually, like it was just standard procedure. He said the family signed an NDA as part of accepting the money, which meant they legally couldn't talk about the show's practices or what might have contributed to Kira's death. The production company had bought their silence just like they'd bought mine. I thought about Kira's mother reading that contract and signing away her right to tell the truth about what happened to her daughter. I wondered what amount of money they'd decided was worth that trade. I tried talking to Mike, the camera operator, during a break later that week. We'd worked together on a few shoots, and he'd always seemed like a decent guy. I found him in the equipment room organizing cables and asked if we could talk privately. He looked around to make sure we were alone, and I started to say something about how wrong everything felt and how Kira deserved better. He cut me off before I could finish. He said we all signed the same contracts, and he had student loans that would destroy him if he lost this job. He said he felt bad about what happened, but there was nothing any of us could do about it now. He told me the best thing for everyone was to keep our heads down and get through it. Then he picked up his equipment bag and left the room. I stood there alone, surrounded by camera gear, and realized I was completely isolated. Everyone else on the crew was just as trapped as I was, and nobody was going to risk their own security to do the right thing. Diane pulled me aside the following week while I was reviewing footage in one of the editing bays. She closed the door behind her and sat down in the chair next to mine. She said I'd done good work this season despite the unfortunate circumstances. She said she'd been impressed with my ability to build rapport with contestants and extract compelling content. Then she told me the network was greenlighting another show for next season, and she wanted to bring me on as associate producer. The title came with a significant pay increase and more responsibility. She said it was an opportunity most people had to work years to get, and she was offering it to me because she saw potential. The promotion felt like blood money. She was rewarding me for my complicity in Kira's death, and expecting me to do it all again with new victims. But I was too scared to turn it down because refusing might make her suspicious or angry. I told her thank you and that I was honored and I'd love to accept the position. She smiled and patted my shoulder and said she knew I'd make the right choice. The production company made all of us attend mandatory grief counseling sessions the next week. They brought in a therapist who set up in one of the offices and saw us individually throughout the day. When it was my turn, I sat down across from her and she asked how I was coping with the loss. She had a kind face and a gentle voice and seemed genuinely concerned. I wanted to tell her everything about the medication and the manipulation and how we'd deliberately pushed Kira past her breaking point. But I knew the therapist was hired by the production company and would report back anything concerning I said. So I lied and said I was managing okay. I said it was hard losing someone so young, but I was processing my grief in healthy ways. She asked if I was sleeping and eating regularly, and I lied again and said yes. She gave me some pamphlets about coping with loss and told me her door was always open if I needed to talk. I thanked her and left feeling even more alone than before because I couldn't tell the truth to the one person whose job was supposed to be helping me deal with trauma. The next week, Diane called me into the editing bay where they were working on the final cut. She sat me down in front of the monitors and told me to watch what they'd done with Kira's panic attack footage. The editor had taken the raw footage from that public speaking challenge and transformed it into something completely different. They added slow-motion shots of Kira's face as she started hyperventilating. They cut in reaction shots from other contestants looking concerned and dramatic music building in the background. They even added sound effects to make her breathing sound more intense. The final product looked like a carefully crafted dramatic moment designed to pull at viewer emotions. I sat there watching Kira's genuine suffering turned into entertainment and realized this was always the plan. Diane had orchestrated that challenge specifically to break Kira down on camera, and now they were packaging her pain as compelling television. The editor kept the cameras rolling during her collapse, and the aftermath showed other contestants rushing to help while sad piano music played. Diane leaned back in her chair looking satisfied and said the footage was exactly what the show needed. She told the editor to make sure this scene appeared in all the promotional materials because it would hook viewers immediately. 2 months passed and the season premiere date arrived. I watched the ratings come in that night from my apartment because I couldn't face being at the viewing party with everyone else. The numbers were huge, bigger than any previous season. By the next morning, the show was trending on social media, and entertainment news sites were calling it the most dramatic premiere in reality TV history. Diane sent a group text to the production team celebrating the success and thanking everyone for their hard work. The network immediately renewed the show for 2 more seasons based on the premiere ratings. I sat on my couch reading articles about how compelling and emotional the episode was, while knowing that Kira had died 6 weeks ago, and nobody watching had any idea what really happened. The tragedy had sold exactly like Diane predicted, and I felt sick knowing I helped make it happen. The marketing campaign was everywhere after that. I started seeing Kira's face on billboards during my commute to work. Bus stops had huge ads showing her mid-panic attack with taglines about shocking twists and emotional drama. The subway stations displayed posters with her image and text promising the most intense season yet. Every time I saw her face, I thought about her family and wondered if they were seeing these ads too. The production company had paid them a settlement that came with an NDA, so they couldn't talk about what really happened on set. I imagined her mother seeing her daughter's face used to sell a TV show, and not being able to say anything about how that daughter actually died. The ads were everywhere for weeks, and there was no escaping them. A journalist from an entertainment news site started asking questions about a month after the premiere. She contacted several crew members, including me, wanting to know about safety protocols and mental health support for contestants. She said she'd heard rumors about conditions on set, and wanted to verify if contestants had access to their prescribed medications during filming. I got scared when I saw her email and immediately forwarded it to Diane without responding. The network's legal team contacted the journalist within 24 hours. They sent her a letter citing ongoing litigation concerns and threatening legal action if she published anything about the show's production practices. They also reminded her that all crew and contestants had signed NDAs that prohibited them from discussing internal show operations. The journalist's inquiry disappeared completely after that, and I never heard from her again. The network had shut down any potential investigation before it could even start. I stopped sleeping well around that time. I would lie in bed replaying everything that happened during filming and seeing Kira's face when I closed my eyes. I started having panic attacks in my apartment at random times, my heart racing and my chest tight and my hands shaking. The attacks felt exactly like what Kira described experiencing before we took away her medication. I couldn't tell anyone the real reason I was having them, because that would violate my NDA. When the panic attacks got bad enough that I couldn't function at work, I made an appointment with a doctor. She asked me what was causing my stress, and I lied and said it was normal work pressure in a demanding industry. She prescribed medication for anxiety and told me to consider therapy. I took the pills and felt like a complete hypocrite, knowing I'd helped create the situation that killed someone who needed the same kind of help. Diane announced 3 months after Kira's death that we were casting for the next season. She called a meeting with the production team and said she wanted to find contestants with even more compelling backstories this time. She specifically told us to look for people who'd overcome trauma, or had difficult family situations, or struggled with mental health issues. She said those were the contestants who made the best television because they had real emotional depth. I sat in casting sessions for the next 2 weeks listening to vulnerable people share the most painful parts of their lives. They talked about abuse and loss and depression and anxiety, while I took notes knowing exactly how we would use those weaknesses against them. A woman talked about her eating disorder and I wrote it down. A man described his father's suicide and I marked him as a strong candidate. Every single person who opened up to us was giving us ammunition to manipulate them later, and they had no idea. One of the women who auditioned was named Veronica Booker, and she reminded me, so much of Kira, it was painful. She had the same shy sweetness and the same openness when she talked about her life. She told us about her social anxiety and how she was trying to push herself out of her comfort zone by applying for the show. She said she'd always been scared to put herself out there, but wanted to prove she could do something brave. I watched Diane's face light up during the interview, because Veronica was exactly the type of contestant she loved to cast. After Veronica left the room, Diane said she was perfect, and we needed to get her on the show. I wanted to run after Veronica and warn her not to do it, to tell her what really happens to vulnerable people in this environment. But I couldn't say anything without risking my job and facing legal consequences, so I stayed silent and hated myself for it. The season finale aired 4 months after Kira's death, and the network had created an elaborate tribute to her. The episode opened with a montage of Kira's best moments from the season set to emotional music. Then the host appeared on screen and gave a speech about how Kira had touched everyone's hearts and would never be forgotten. They showed clips of other contestants crying and talking about how special she was. The whole thing was designed to make the show look compassionate and caring about contestant welfare. Social media exploded with responses praising the producers for handling the tragedy so sensitively. People posted about how moved they were by the tribute and how much the show clearly valued its cast members. Entertainment sites published articles commending the network for their thoughtful approach to a difficult situation. I read all the responses knowing the truth about what actually happened, and feeling like I was going crazy. Diane started doing interviews after the finale about the importance of mental health awareness in reality television. She appeared on morning talk shows and podcasts, discussing how production companies need to prioritize contestant well-being. She talked about implementing new safety protocols and providing better mental health resources for future seasons. I watched her give these interviews knowing she had personally confiscated Kira's anxiety medication and then deliberately created a situation designed to trigger a panic attack. The distance between what Diane said publicly and what she actually did privately made me feel like I was living in 2 different realities. She sounded so sincere and concerned in the interviews that I almost believed her myself, even though I'd witnessed everything firsthand. 3 months after Kira's death, Diane called me into her office and told me I was promoted to associate producer. She said I'd proven myself during a difficult season, and she wanted to give me more responsibility going forward. The promotion came with a significant salary increase that nearly doubled what I'd been making. I moved out of my small studio apartment into a 1-bedroom place in a much nicer neighborhood. I bought new furniture and better clothes and started going to nicer restaurants. Everything in my life improved materially while I carried the knowledge that it was all funded by my silence about what really happened to Kira. The money felt dirty, but I took it anyway because I didn't know what else to do, and I was too scared of the consequences of speaking up. I started keeping a bottle of vodka in my desk drawer at work, and another one under my bathroom sink at home. The first drink happened 3 days after my promotion when I couldn't sleep, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kira's body on that bathroom floor. I poured 2 fingers into a coffee mug and drank it fast, and felt the burn in my throat push the image away for a few minutes. After that, it became easier to pour a little more each time and to start earlier in the day. My friends noticed something was different when we went out for dinner, and I ordered 3 drinks before the food arrived. One of them asked if I was okay, and I told her work had been really stressful with long hours and difficult deadlines. She accepted that explanation because people in entertainment always work too much and nobody questions it. Another friend commented that I seemed distracted and not myself lately. I made up something about a project that wasn't going well and changed the subject quickly. The lying got smoother with practice, just like everything else in this job. I started declining invitations to hang out, because I didn't want anyone watching me drink or asking more questions I couldn't answer. It was easier to stay home alone with my bottle and my guilt. 6 months after Kira's death, the show won an award for unscripted programming at an industry ceremony. I sat in the audience wearing a dress I'd bought with my increased salary, and watched Diane walk up to accept the trophy. She gave a speech thanking the network and the crew, and then her voice got softer and more emotional. She said the season had been difficult because they lost someone special, and she wanted to dedicate the award to Kira's memory. The audience applauded, and some people were crying, and I sat there feeling sick while Diane used Kira's death to generate sympathy and make herself look compassionate. She talked about how Kira had touched everyone's hearts and would never be forgotten. The camera panned across the audience, and I made sure my face looked appropriately sad, even though what I really felt was rage and disgust. After the ceremony, there was a reception with champagne and appetizers. People kept congratulating Diane and telling her how moving her speech was. I stood in the corner drinking too much champagne too fast and wanting to scream the truth at everyone in that room. A week later, I stopped at a coffee shop near the production offices to get something caffeinated before a long day of prep work. I was waiting for my order when I noticed one of the medics who had responded to Kira's emergency standing a few feet away. He was in regular clothes instead of his uniform, but I recognized his face immediately. Our eyes met and we both froze for a second. Neither of us said anything, but I could see in his expression that he remembered that day and knew exactly what had really happened. He looked away first and grabbed his coffee and left quickly. I stood there holding my cup and realized he was trapped by the same silence I was, probably signed his own NDAs and faced his own threats if he talked. We were all complicit in different ways and all equally powerless to do anything about it. 3 months after the award ceremony, we started filming the next season with a new group of contestants and the same bachelor format. I watched the production team set up the bar area and stock it with more alcohol than 20 people could drink in a month. The schedule was designed with the same sleep deprivation tactics, waking contestants at odd hours for surprise activities and keeping them off balance. Diane held the first production meeting and laid out her vision for dramatic moments she wanted to create. She used almost the exact same language she'd used the previous season about pushing people and making good television. I sat there taking notes like I was supposed to and felt like I was watching the same nightmare play out again with different faces. The contestants arrived excited and nervous and had no idea what they were actually signing up for. By the end of week 1, they were already drinking heavily and starting to show signs of stress. Week 2 of filming, one of the contestants named Veronica started displaying behavior that reminded me painfully of Kira. She was quieter than the others and seemed overwhelmed by the constant cameras and manufactured drama. I was assigned to work with her as part of my associate producer duties. I tried to be gentler than I'd been with Kira, asking softer questions and not pushing as hard for her vulnerabilities. Diane noticed during a production meeting and pulled me aside afterward. She told me I was going soft, and if I couldn't do my job properly, she'd find someone who could. I needed to get better content from Veronica, or I'd be replaced, and she meant it. I went back to pushing harder, even though it made me hate myself more. During week 3, a different contestant approached the production coordinator and asked about her anxiety medication. She said she'd brought it with her, but someone had taken it from her room. I watched the coordinator explain that medications weren't allowed during filming for legal liability reasons, and the contestant would need to manage without it for the duration of the show. The justifications were identical to what they'd told Kira, and I stood there listening without saying a single word. The contestant looked scared and asked what she was supposed to do if she had a panic attack. The coordinator told her the medical team was always on standby and she'd be fine. I walked away knowing I was a coward, and that staying silent made me just as responsible as everyone else. 6 months after Kira's death, I got a message request on social media from someone I didn't know. I opened it and saw it was from a woman with Kira's last name asking if she could talk to me about her daughter. My hands started shaking as I read the message. She said she knew I'd worked on the show and she just wanted to understand what Kira's last weeks had been like. She said she was trying to make sense of what happened and needed to talk to people who were there. I stared at that message for 10 minutes, feeling like I might throw up. Then I blocked her account and deleted the message request. I couldn't face her, and I was terrified that if we talked, I might say something that violated my NDA. The guilt of blocking Kira's mother felt like another weight added to everything else I was carrying. But I did it anyway because I was too scared of the consequences. That same month, the network held a press conference announcing 3 new reality shows in development. All of them would use similar formats to the show that killed Kira, with contestants living together in isolated environments competing for prizes. Diane was attached as executive producer on all 3 projects. The press release talked about her proven track record and ability to create compelling unscripted content. Her reputation in the industry had never been stronger, and she was being held up as an example of successful producing. I read the announcement and understood that the system that destroyed Kira was expanding, not contracting, because it was profitable. 8 months after Kira's death, I was assigned to mentor a new production assistant who'd just graduated film school. She was 23 years old and reminded me so much of myself a year earlier that it hurt to look at her. She was excited and eager and kept talking about how she wanted to make meaningful television that mattered. She asked me questions about the creative process and what it was like working with Diane. I gave her advice about being professional and following directions and didn't mention anything about what the job actually required. I couldn't warn her without violating my NDA and risking my career, so I watched her enthusiasm and knew I was helping to create the next person who would carry this kind of guilt. During week 4 of the new season, Veronica had a breakdown during a group challenge that involved public speaking and personal revelations. It wasn't as severe as Kira's collapse, but it was still frightening to watch. She started hyperventilating and crying and couldn't catch her breath. This time I tried to intervene and called for someone to stop filming and get her medical attention. Diane appeared next to me and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. She pulled me away from the set and told me if I ever undermined her production again, I was fired immediately. She said she'd also enforce the non-compete clause in my contract that would prevent me from working in television for 2 years. I asked what about Veronica, and Diane said the contestant was fine, and I needed to decide if I wanted to keep my job or not. I backed down and went back to my position, and watched them continue filming Veronica's breakdown. She eventually calmed down enough to finish the challenge, but I could see the damage in her eyes and knew we'd pushed her past something she couldn't come back from. The season finished filming 2 weeks later, and Veronica made it through every challenge and date without another major breakdown. I watched her move through the final days like she was operating on autopilot, smiling when the cameras were on her and going completely blank when they cut. The wrap party happened on a Friday night at a hotel ballroom downtown with an open bar and catered food. The contestants who'd made it to the end were there along with all the crew and producers. I saw Veronica standing by herself near the windows holding a glass of wine she wasn't drinking. I walked over because I felt like I owed her something even though I didn't know what. She looked at me and her eyes had that same empty quality I'd seen in Kira during week 5. Like something fundamental had been scooped out and replaced with nothing. We didn't talk about what had happened during filming. She just asked when the show would air and I told her probably in 3 months. She nodded and took a tiny sip of her wine, and I excused myself because I couldn't stand to look at what we'd done to her. The 1-year anniversary of Kira's death landed on a Tuesday in March. I was at my desk going through casting applications for the next season when someone from the network's publicity department stopped by. She had a big arrangement of white lilies and roses that she said the production company was sending to Kira's family with a card about remembering her spirit and talent. I watched her carry the flowers out to her car and wondered if Kira's mother would keep them or throw them in the trash. The settlement the family had signed included an NDA, so they couldn't talk publicly about what really happened, but I figured they knew the truth about how their daughter had been treated. I imagined the flowers sitting on their doorstep, and Kira's mom opening the card and seeing the company logo, and having to decide whether to bring them inside or leave them out to die. I hoped she threw them away, but I suspected she probably kept them because throwing away flowers for your dead daughter feels wrong, even when they come from the people who killed her. 3 months after the anniversary, Diane called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon. She had paperwork spread across her desk and told me to sit down. She explained that the network was developing a new competition show about aspiring musicians, and they wanted someone with experience to produce it. The pay was almost double what I was making as an associate producer, and I'd have my own production team and final say on most creative decisions. Taking the job meant I'd be running the same kind of operation that had destroyed Kira, just with different contestants and a different premise. I asked Diane if I could think about it, and she smiled and said of course, but they needed an answer by Monday. I spent the weekend trying to figure out if I could afford to say no. My rent had gone up, and I had credit card debt from film school, and my car needed new brakes. Turning down the promotion meant staying at my current salary, and probably getting passed over for future opportunities, because producers who turn down advancement don't get offered it again. Monday morning, I went to Diane's office and told her I'd take the job. She seemed pleased and had me sign a new contract with updated confidentiality clauses and a longer non-compete period. I told myself it didn't matter because I was already guilty of what happened to Kira, so being more involved in the same system didn't make me worse than I already was. This thinking helped me sleep a little better for about a week, until I realized I was just making excuses for choosing money and career over any kind of moral stand. The fundamental problem wasn't the job or the contract, it was that I'd become someone who could accept these things without walking away. But walking away meant financial problems I wasn't willing to face, so I stayed and started planning the new show. 4 months into my new producer role, a woman named Jennifer, who'd been a contestant on a dating show 2 seasons earlier, published an article on a media website. She wrote about how producers had manipulated her by feeding her false information about other contestants and withholding food to make everyone more emotional and volatile. She described being forced to stay awake for 36 hours before a crucial elimination ceremony and how producers had taken her anxiety medication claiming it was standard policy. The article went viral and got picked up by major news outlets. 2 days later, the network's legal team sent her a cease and desist letter citing her NDA and threatening a lawsuit for breach of contract and defamation. Jennifer posted on social media that she was just telling her truth, but within a week she'd deleted the article and all her posts about it. 3 weeks after the original article, she published an apology saying she'd been stressed and emotional when she wrote it and that the production company had actually been very professional and supportive. She said she regretted any harm her false allegations had caused, and she took full responsibility for spreading misinformation. I knew exactly what had happened because I'd seen the network's lawyers work before. They'd threatened her with a lawsuit that would bankrupt her, and probably offered a settlement payment in exchange for the retraction and apology. I watched the whole thing unfold on my phone and computer feeling sick. Jennifer had tried to do what I'd been too scared to do, and the system had crushed her completely. She'd lost her credibility and probably had to sign additional NDAs as part of whatever settlement made her back down. Other contestants who might have supported her stayed silent because they saw what happened when someone spoke up. The message was clear to everyone in the industry. The system protects itself and destroys anyone who threatens it. I understood then that I would never be able to tell the truth about Kira, no matter how much guilt I carried. The legal mechanisms were too strong and the consequences too severe. Speaking up meant losing everything and accomplishing nothing because they'd just destroy my credibility the same way they'd destroyed Jennifer's. 2 years and 3 months after Kira died, I was producing my own show about young entrepreneurs competing for investment funding. I had a crew of 12 people and 22 contestants living in a converted warehouse space we'd set up with cameras everywhere. I used every technique Diane had taught me. I made sure alcohol was always available and kept the contestants on irregular sleep schedules. I assigned producers to befriend specific contestants and extract information about their insecurities and fears. When one contestant named Rachel started having anxiety attacks, I didn't send her home. Instead, I designed challenges that would trigger her anxiety because her breakdowns made compelling television. I watched myself do these things and felt completely dead inside, but I was good at the job because Diane had trained me well. The show got strong ratings and the network renewed it for a second season. My career was thriving while I destroyed people the same way I'd watched Kira get destroyed. During the 4th week of filming, a contestant named Ashley came to me after a challenge. She was 24 years old with red hair and freckles, and she reminded me painfully of myself at that age. She asked if anyone had ever gotten seriously hurt doing these kinds of shows. I looked at her open, trusting face and lied without hesitation. I told her that production companies take safety very seriously and have medical staff and therapists available at all times. I said contestants are carefully screened and supported throughout the process. I watched her relax and smile and thank me for the reassurance. I saw my younger self in her expression, that same naive trust in the system and the people running it. She walked away feeling better, and I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror, trying to recognize the person looking back. Over the next year, I developed a reputation as a producer who consistently delivered dramatic content and high ratings. Other producers started asking my advice at industry mixers and production meetings. I shared techniques for manipulating contestants while smiling and making it sound like creative problem-solving rather than psychological exploitation. I explained how to identify vulnerable people during casting and how to push them past their limits without technically violating any regulations. I taught younger producers the same methods Diane had taught me and watched them take notes and ask follow-up questions. Everyone wanted to know how I got such good breakdowns and confrontations on camera. I gave them detailed answers while feeling absolutely nothing inside except a dull awareness that I'd become exactly what I'd feared and hated 3 years earlier. 3 years and 2 months after Kira's death, I attended an industry awards ceremony at a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. I was nominated for a producer award that I didn't win, but the show I'd created got recognized for unscripted content. I was at the bar getting a drink when I saw Diane across the room talking to a group of network executives. She noticed me and walked over with a glass of champagne in her hand. She told me she'd been following my career and was really impressed with what I'd accomplished. She said I'd become one of her best students and she was proud of how far I'd come in such a short time. She put her hand on my shoulder and smiled at me with genuine warmth. I wanted to scream or throw my drink in her face or tell her that she'd turned me into a monster just like her. Instead, I smiled back and thanked her for the mentorship and said I couldn't have done it without everything she'd taught me. We talked for another few minutes about upcoming projects and industry trends. When she walked away, I finished my drink in one long swallow and ordered another one. 6 months later, I was sitting on a panel at a film school career day with 3 other producers. The auditorium was packed with students who looked exactly like I had 4 years ago, eager and excited and completely unprepared for what this industry actually requires. A girl in the front row raised her hand and asked what advice we had for people starting out in reality television. I smiled and told her it was an incredibly exciting field with lots of opportunities for creative storytelling and meaningful work. I said the key was being passionate about giving audiences compelling content and being willing to work hard to make that happen. I watched her write down every word I said, and I didn't mention Kira or the manipulation or the NDAs or any of the actual truth about what the job demands. Another student asked about work-life balance, and I laughed along with the other panelists and said it could be challenging, but was worth it for the right person. After the panel ended, several students came up to talk, and I shook their hands and gave them my card and told them to reach out if they were interested in production assistant positions. One girl told me she really admired my work and had watched every show I'd produced. I thanked her and said we were always looking for talented people who were eager to learn. I drove back to the production office feeling nothing at all about the lies I'd just told. 3 weeks later, a new production assistant started on my current show, and her name was on the paperwork, but I just thought of her as the new girl. She was 22 and had just graduated and reminded me painfully of myself before everything happened. She came into my office on her second day and told me she was so excited to be working on meaningful television that really showed authentic human experiences. She said she'd studied documentary filmmaking and believed reality TV could be a powerful medium for truth-telling when done responsibly. I nodded and remembered when I used to believe that exact same thing. I assigned her to work closely with one of our contestants who had mentioned an eating disorder history during the intake interview. I told the new girl to become friends with this contestant and find out more details about her relationship with food and body image and what specific triggers made her feel most insecure. The new girl asked if this was to make sure the contestant got proper support during filming. I said yes. That's exactly why we needed the information and watched her believe me completely. She spent the next week talking to the contestant during breaks and reported back to me with detailed notes about childhood trauma and current struggles and specific words that made the contestant start crying. She did this enthusiastically because she trusted me and wanted to impress me and thought she was helping, exactly like I had trusted Diane 4 years ago. I took her notes and passed them to the head producer who used them to design challenges that would maximize the contestant's psychological distress on camera. The new girl didn't know that's what her information was used for, and I didn't tell her. By week 3 of filming, I watched this young woman start to realize what was actually happening on set. She came to me confused about why we were pushing contestants so hard, and why we kept the alcohol flowing constantly, and why we were manufacturing conflicts between people who had been getting along fine. I told her the same things Diane had told me about giving America a show worth watching, and how sometimes we have to push people a little to get authentic reactions. I saw the doubt in her face, but she wanted to keep her job, so she nodded and went back to work. Over the next month, I watched her compromise her ethics in small increments exactly like I had done. First, she stopped questioning the alcohol. Then she stopped objecting when we woke contestants at 3 in the morning. Then she started actively suggesting ways to manipulate situations for better footage. She was learning the job and becoming good at it, and I was teaching her, creating the next generation of people who would carry guilt and trauma from what this industry requires of them. I was perpetuating the exact cycle that had destroyed me, and I did it because that's what producers do. We train the people below us to become versions of ourselves. 4 years after Kira's death, I was successful by every industry standard that mattered. I had 3 shows currently in production and 2 more in development. My name appeared in trade publications, and other producers asked my advice at industry events. I'd been promoted twice and made enough money to buy a condo in a good neighborhood. I was also an alcoholic who drank every night until I passed out, because it was the only way to stop thinking about Kira's face. I had untreated PTSD that gave me panic attacks in grocery stores and made me jump at sudden noises. I couldn't maintain any kind of romantic relationship because I couldn't tell anyone the truth about my work, so I just avoided getting close to people at all. My friends from film school had stopped inviting me to things because I always canceled at the last minute or showed up drunk. I looked successful from the outside, but inside I was completely hollow, just going through the motions of a life built on silence about what really happened. Every time I cast a new show, I saw Kira's face in the vulnerable contestants who auditioned. The girl with anxiety, the one with the eating disorder, the shy one who just wanted to be loved, they all reminded me of her. The guilt hadn't faded even slightly with time. It had just become a constant background noise I'd learned to function through like tinnitus or chronic pain. I manipulated these contestants anyway because that was my job and I was good at it and I needed the money and the career I'd built. I saw Kira in their faces when they broke down on camera, and I kept filming anyway. During the 5th year, I was producing a dating show when one of the contestants had a serious mental health crisis in week 4 of filming. She started having panic attacks that lasted for hours and couldn't eat or sleep, and told the medic on set that she was having thoughts about hurting herself. I watched the head producer handle it exactly the same way Diane had handled Kira. They kept her on set, kept the cameras rolling, used her breakdown as content for the show. This contestant survived but barely, and when I saw her 6 months after filming wrapped at a publicity event, she looked completely different. The damage was obvious and permanent in her eyes and the way she couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She'd made it through alive, but she'd never be the same person she was before we got our hands on her. I realized sitting at that publicity event that this would keep happening forever, because the system rewards the behavior that causes harm. Shows with dramatic breakdowns get better ratings. Producers who deliver that content get promoted. Networks that air it make more money. The whole industry is built on a foundation of psychological exploitation, and everyone involved knows it, but nobody can say it out loud because of the NDAS and the non-competes, and the fear of being sued into bankruptcy. Ratings matter more than people, and those of us who know the truth are legally and financially trapped into silence about it. We just keep making shows and destroying contestants and training new producers to do the same thing. I started thinking seriously about leaving the industry, but I'd been doing this for 5 years, and had no other skills that would pay anywhere close to what I was making. My degree was in film production, which was worthless outside entertainment, and the non-compete clauses in my contracts meant I couldn't work in television or streaming or any related field for 2 years if I quit. I had rent and bills and student loans that required my current salary. I'd built my entire adult life around this career, and walking away would mean starting over from nothing in my late 20s with no money and no prospects. I was trapped by my own choices and my own complicity and my own need to pay my bills. Finally, I started seeing a therapist because the panic attacks were getting worse, and I couldn't sleep more than 3 hours a night without nightmares. The therapist was nice and asked good questions, and in our 3rd session, she asked if something specific had happened that caused my anxiety and depression. I opened my mouth to tell her about Kira and the manipulation and the guilt I carried every single day, but then I remembered the NDA I'd signed 5 years ago. I couldn't tell her the truth without risking a lawsuit that would destroy me financially for the rest of my life. So instead, I described vague work stress and long hours and the general pressure of the entertainment industry. She nodded sympathetically and said it sounded like I was experiencing burnout, which wasn't even close to the real problem. She prescribed medication for anxiety and depression and suggested I consider taking a vacation or possibly changing jobs if the stress was too much. I took the prescription and knew the medication might help with symptoms, but couldn't address the fundamental issue that I was complicit in an exploitative system and couldn't tell anyone the truth about it. The pills helped me get through production days without panic attacks, but they didn't change the fact that I was still manipulating vulnerable people for ratings. I swallowed them every morning and went to set and did the same things that caused the anxiety in the first place. 5 years after Kira died, I was producing a dating competition show when one of the contestants came to me during a break between scenes. She was 23 and had been crying, and she said she couldn't stop thinking about hurting herself. I asked if she was serious, and she nodded and showed me marks on her wrists from a few months before filming started. I told her I needed to report this to the showrunner, and she begged me not to because she didn't want to get sent home. I reported it anyway because that was protocol, and the showrunner called me into his office to discuss it. He pulled up footage of the contestant from the past week and watched her breaking down during a challenge. He replayed it 3 times, focusing on her face when she started crying. Then he told me she was staying because her mental state was making incredible television, and we needed to see where it went. I said she told me she was having thoughts about suicide, and he said we'd keep an eye on her, but the footage was too good to lose. I walked out of that office and went back to set, and watched this woman struggle through the next 4 weeks of filming. She lost weight and stopped sleeping and started having the same dead look in her eyes that Kira had. The cameras captured all of it, and the editors cut together packages that made her breakdown look dramatic and compelling. I was there for every moment, and I did nothing to stop it because I'd learned that stopping it meant losing my job. The contestant made it through the season and went home, and I didn't think about her much after that because there was always another show starting. 6 months later, I heard through another producer that she'd tried to kill herself and survived, and her family was threatening to sue the production company. The company settled fast and paid them a significant amount of money, and made them sign an NDA as part of the agreement. Nobody outside the immediate situation ever knew it happened because the legal team made sure of that. I got promoted to executive producer after that season because my shows consistently delivered good ratings. The promotion meant I was the one making decisions about how far to push contestants, and whether someone's mental health crisis was worth the content it would generate. I'd become the person sitting in the office watching footage and deciding who stays and who goes, based on how their suffering looked on camera. I was Diane now, except I'd arrived at this position through 5 years of small compromises that had seemed reasonable at the time. Each decision had felt justified in the moment because I needed the job and the money and the career advancement. I looked back at those 5 years and couldn't identify the exact point where I'd crossed the line because it had happened so gradually. I started mentoring junior producers because that was part of my new role, and I taught them the same techniques Diane had taught me. I showed them how to identify vulnerable contestants and exploit their insecurities for dramatic content. I explained how to manufacture conflict between people who might otherwise get along. I demonstrated how to use alcohol and sleep deprivation and isolation to break down someone's defenses. They took notes and asked good questions and learned fast because they wanted to advance their careers just like I had. I was spreading the manipulation methods to the next generation and training them to hurt people the same way I'd been trained. The cycle continued because that's what the industry required, and I was too trapped by my own choices to do anything different. 6 years after Kira died, I was scrolling through social media at 2 a.m, drunk on my couch when I saw a post from her mother. She'd written about Kira's birthday and shared photos from when Kira was younger and talked about her daughter's beautiful spirit and kind heart. She said she missed her every day and wished she could have protected her better. I read it 3 times and started crying for the first time in years because I knew exactly what had destroyed that beautiful spirit and kind heart. I knew because I'd participated in it, and then spent 6 years staying silent about it, and eventually becoming the person who did it to others. I closed the app and poured another drink and didn't comment or reach out because I was still bound by the NDA I'd signed 6 years earlier. I did some math one night and calculated that I'd been directly involved in producing content that exploited around 150 contestants over 6 years. Some of them had come through relatively okay, and went back to their normal lives without too much damage. Others had been visibly changed by the experience, and I could see it in their faces at wrap parties and reunion specials. At least 3 that I knew about had attempted suicide after filming, and probably more that I didn't know about, because the settlements always included the NDAs. The industry kept growing, and reality television became more popular, and the shows kept pushing boundaries further. I watched younger producers try to out-manipulate each other to get better ratings and recognition. They competed to see who could create the most dramatic breakdowns and explosive conflicts. The techniques that had seemed extreme when I started were now standard practice, and new producers were developing even more aggressive methods. I was financially successful by this point, and professionally respected in the industry. I owned a nice condo in a good neighborhood and drove a car that cost more than my first year's salary. I had money in savings and a retirement account and health insurance and all the markers of adult stability. I woke up every morning in my comfortable bed and hated what I'd become, and then went to work and did it all over again because I didn't know how to stop. 7 years after Kira died, the network called me into a meeting about developing my own show format. They wanted me to pitch ideas for a new reality competition series and said they were impressed with my track record. I sat in that conference room with 3 executives and presented concepts I'd been working on that used every manipulative technique I'd learned. They loved it and offered me a development deal worth more money than I'd ever imagined making. I walked out of that building knowing I'd reached the career milestone I used to dream about in film school, back when I still believed in making meaningful television. The deal came with a signing bonus and profit participation and my own production office. I took the contract home and read through all 40 pages of legal language protecting the network from liability. Then I signed it because that's what I do now. I make choices that benefit my career while knowing they'll hurt other people, and I've gotten good at the rationalization that helps me sleep at night. The development process took 6 months, and I hired a team, and we started casting for the pilot episode. I looked at hundreds of applications from people who wanted to be on television, and I selected the ones with the most exploitable vulnerabilities. A woman wrote about her eating disorder recovery, and I flagged her application as promising. A man mentioned his anger management issues, and I moved him to the top of the pile. I was building a cast designed to break down under pressure because that's what makes good television, and I knew exactly how to make it happen. 3 months into development, a journalist sent me an email asking about Kira's death for a retrospective piece about the show. She said she was investigating the mental health practices on reality TV sets and wanted to talk about what really happened. I stared at that email for 20 minutes, feeling my heart race because part of me wanted to tell her everything. Then I forwarded it to the network's publicity department and sent her a response declining to comment. I maintained the silence I'd kept for 7 years because the alternative was financial ruin and legal destruction. The journalist followed up twice more, and I ignored both messages. Eventually, she published her piece without my participation, and it focused on industry practices in general, without naming specific incidents. I read the article and recognized details from Kira's case that had been sanitized and made vague enough to avoid lawsuits. Nothing changed after the article came out because the industry is designed to protect itself. I started seeing Diane occasionally at industry events and award shows. We'd make small talk about current projects and congratulate each other on successes. She created me in her image through those 6 weeks of filming 7 years ago, and I hate her for it. But I also know I made my own choices every step of the way, and I can't blame her for who I became. At one event, she told me she was proud of my development deal and said I'd learned well. I smiled and thanked her and felt sick to my stomach. We both knew what we were and what we'd done, and we were both still successful because the system rewards the behavior that destroyed Kira. The production assistant I'd mentored 5 years earlier was at that same event. She'd been promoted to producer and was working on 3 different shows using the techniques I taught her. She came over to thank me for the mentorship and told me about a contestant breakdown she'd engineered that got amazing ratings. I congratulated her and watched her walk away, knowing she probably carries her own guilt now. The cycle continues because I trained her the same way Diane trained me, and she'll train someone else eventually. 8 years after Kira died, I was still in the industry and still successful, and still completely trapped by my own complicity. My development deal had been greenlit, and we were in production on the pilot. I owned a house now and had a retirement account and all the markers of professional success. I'd built a life and career on silence about what really happens behind the cameras. Every morning I woke up in my comfortable bed and hated what I'd become, and then went to work and did it all over again. I was manipulating a new group of contestants who had no idea what they'd signed up for. One woman reminded me painfully of Kira in her sweetness and anxiety. I pushed her toward a breakdown anyway because that was my job and I was good at it. I thought about Kira often while I was doing this work. I thought about her face when she collapsed on stage during the public speaking challenge. I thought about finding her body on that bathroom floor. Her death didn't change anything about how reality television operates. It just taught producers to be more careful about legal liability and documentation. We still confiscate medication and manipulate sleep schedules and manufacture conflicts. We just have better lawyers now and more detailed consent forms. I've accepted that I'll carry this guilt for the rest of my life. I've accepted that I'll never be able to tell the truth publicly, because the NDAs and non-competes and financial dependence ensure my silence is permanent. I've made peace with being the kind of person who knows better, but does it anyway. The industry that killed Kira is thriving and growing, and I'm a successful part of it. I've made peace with being complicit because the alternative is financial ruin and career destruction, and I'm too much of a coward to choose that path. I know other people have tried to speak up over the years, and I've watched them get destroyed by lawsuits and industry blacklisting. I've watched them lose everything while the system continues unchanged. So I stay silent and collect my paychecks, and manipulate vulnerable people for entertainment. I'm not looking for redemption or forgiveness because I don't deserve either one. I know exactly what I am and what I've done. I know I participated in destroying Kira, and then spent 8 years staying silent about it while training other people to do the same thing. I live with it every day because I chose career and money over speaking the truth, and I'll have to carry that choice for the rest of my life. Sometimes I wonder if Kira's family thinks about the people who were there when she died. I wonder if they picture the crew members and producers standing around while their daughter took her last breath. I hope they don't know that every single one of us is still working in this industry. I hope they don't know that we're all still silent about what really happened. I hope they think maybe someone tried to speak up or fight back or do something to make it right. The truth is worse than that. The truth is we're all still here, still making the same shows, still using the same methods. We learned nothing except how to protect ourselves legally. I'm producing content right now that exploits people the same way we exploited Kira. The other crew members from that production are scattered across different shows doing the same thing. We see each other at industry events sometimes and we don't talk about it. We just nod and move on because we all signed the same contracts and made the same choices. This is reality television, and this is what it costs. It's not just the contestants who break down on camera or the ones who attempt suicide after filming wraps. It's also the crew members who facilitate it and then carry the weight of what we've done for the rest of our lives. We're all trapped in different ways by the same system. Kira's death changed nothing about how these shows operate. It just added one more person to the list of casualties that nobody outside the industry will ever know about. I'll keep working and keep silent and keep hating myself. That's just how it is.